Welcome to That Good Fight, a reformation for gentlemen. My name's Aaron Edwards, joined as ever by the two peas in the pod, Nathan Baylor and Tom Jollicock. That just came to me,
Yeah,
and that's very emasculating for you. So let me just, is there a better? Would you rather being a pea in a pod?
It sounds very cosy.
Because it is a podcast,
very
so
brotherly.
it is like there's probably a better thing than a pea, though, isn't there? There's all sorts of.
Where's this gone
Kidney
already?
bean.
Where's this gone? We're still in the pod. We're in the pod. 3 peas in the pod. And
Are we asleep? Am I dreaming?
you are dreaming. This
Okay,
isn't
just
really
checking.
the intro.
Okay.
And also for you listeners at home, that wasn't the introduction. So
Okay.
you just dreamt that as well.
Okay.
But how are you doing?
Well, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't think you actually said who we are, but I think people
No,
know.
we did.
who
I did.
are.
I did.
Okay,
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
right. Okay.
You're in
okay.
the dream
been
like you
absolutely-
did.
I'm still asleep. Clearly.
Yeah.
Sorry,
We're
I'm just waking up.
together.
This is odd, guys.
Surreal. This is absurdist.
Yeah.
Come on, we've broken the fourth wall already. But I did ask you, how are you?
Oh, I'm all right, thank you.
you're
Yeah,
okay?
I've just come back from teaching history.
Good.
So my mind is full of Edward I and
Excellent. All right,
crimes and
Longshanks.
punishments. Yes, crime and punishment.
Edward
hanging,
the
drawing,
First, who
quartering.
bankrupted himself by building like 9 castles in Wales.
It's crazy,
Like,
isn't
he
it?
was like,
Yeah.
I'm going to build an iron ring of castles around the Welsh rebels,
It's madness.
and he kind of succeeded because they were like, we've got nowhere, we have to hide in Snowdonia, and that's kind of.
Have you seen Braveheart, which of course features
Oh,
Edward
yeah.
the First? It's such
It's
a terrible
classic.
depiction. It's annoying, but it's
Yeah.
also really fun.
the most? It is. It is one of those.
terribly historically
Yeah,
inaccurate.
that's right.
But,
Yeah, I won't watch it for historical reference.
Don't watch it for that.
You've
Watch it
never
for
seen Braveheart?
I don't think I have. Yeah.
That's outrageous.
No, I'm quite content with that.
I'm not
Yeah,
content
fair.
with that. That's not the matters that I'm not content with you, but that is crazy. Well, we should do an episode sometime on kind of
Mel
like top
Gibson.
10.
Oh,
Mel,
yeah.
I mean, Mel Gibson is a whole phenomenon unto himself, of course. But it is interesting, Mel Gibson, about all that his movies, that the masculine kind of bent to in his movie.
Yeah.
And actually, this is actually I'm jumping ahead with this segue, but let's just run with this segue. Let's
it.
ride this wave. Mel Gibson is one of 3 people that Donald Trump has selected to revive Hollywood. Do you know
I
this?
saw that.
My wife told
Apparently,
me this.
Mel wasn't aware.
Who
Was he
aware?
not?
He was made aware at the same time everyone else was.
That's brilliant.
Really?
Apparently.
Donald Trump was like, he'll find out. It's fine.
He'll do it.
That's amazing. And he's like, yeah, that's fine. And it was Mel Gibson, John Voight, and Sylvester Stallone,
Yeah.
I think. And there's something about that, which is why, I mean, that's partly why we're doing this episode today on some of the what we could be called the vibe shift in the socio-political sphere and how it affects Christians, how it affects men in particular. And I think this is interesting. He's chosen 3 men who are ostensibly masculine role models in the movie world. You can't say, you say whatever you like and go, oh, but I don't think Mel Gibson said this thing about the Jews, or Sylvester Stallone has this problem with it, whatever. It's like, fine, yes, they've probably done drugs. There's probably all sorts of problems in them. They're not.
I mean, they've been
brilliant
around a
role
long
models and
time as
everything.
well. They've got to have done some stuff wrong.
They've done some stuff. And I don't even know if Sylvester Stallone's a Christian, whatever. That's not Donald Trump's framework, of course. But for us, as we look at it and we go, do we just look apathetically and go, oh, it doesn't really matter. Oh, look, some other stuff is happening in the political realm as Christians. Great. Let's just carry on as we are, and that's fine. That's how many Christians respond to it. We'll get into that later, that kind of pietistic approach. But I just thought it was interesting that it's one of these kind of executive decisions that we're seeing many of early on in
Many.
Trump's
We should
regime.
say we're recording this on the 28th of January, 2025, and I say that not
before
to
the
date us,
revolution.
gentlemen, but before the revolution, but because we have obviously seen the inauguration of Donald Trump, and as you say, the many 200 plus executive orders.
Yeah.
I know there are some constitutional concerns over that, the reliance on executive orders, and I would
Yes.
share those concerns, but
Yeah.
I also think it is quite satisfying from across the pond, thinking, if only.
I
If
mean,
only
just
we
come
had
in and just
something
like
it.
do stuff that everyone's like, this is common
I
sense.
know.
Yeah.
I know.
I'm going to release a load of files that you really want to find out. That there's no
kind of
real
amazing.
reason for us to keep.
I mean,
it
there is a
secret.
connection actually between Edward I and Trump in this
go
regard,
for
that
it.
he is what we're seeing in American life
Yeah.
is the increasing monarchical
Yeah.
nature of the presidency, the emphasis on the executive.
Yeah.
I
And
look
a
at-
dynasty like the Baron
Yes,
Trump thing.
and you send convoys because you're of the court and
Yeah.
you have to have approval. And really, anything now that will follow, maybe it's JD Vance next.
Yeah.
It looks likely right now that it is, but 4 years is a long time.
but even his son has clearly been groomed.
Baron potentially,
Yeah.
but you're definitely looking
Not
at
next,
Trump's
obviously,
court.
yeah.
You're looking
Yeah.
at the court.
Mar-a-Lago
of-
is the court, isn't it?
Yeah.
You go there and
Yeah. So it's interesting that you Americans have turned to the
I know.
turned to monarchy after all this time.
And that, exactly right. I mean, we'll get onto the UK because there's a whole interesting thing about how we'll bring Nigel Farage and Elon in.
Yeah.
We'll say bring them in. We won't bring them in.
You should explain what vibe shift means, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. Vibe shift is just a sense of a changing of the winds, shall we say? It's you get a sense culturally of where things are at. The culture works in such a way that some things are unspoken but are just the case. There's certain conventions that are the case. So there's things you just do or don't say, things that are or aren't allowed. We've referred, I'm sure, on this podcast before to the Overton window. Yeah. What is the acceptable pattern of speech or pattern of acceptable opinion? And then you can't really speak outside that window, and then suddenly that window shifts a little bit, maybe to the right, maybe to the left, and then suddenly you're allowed to say certain things that you weren't before. So you could say lots of things.
It's Gen Z vocab, isn't it? So isn't it sort of vibe, like, when Gen Z have a whole vocabulary of their own, more than we ever did as millennials, Gen Y, I should say.
I'm being winsome to the Gen Z, is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, but I just mean Gen Z will often say, it's giving, like, say, if the kids in one of my English classes say, that picture on there, it's giving Narnia.
Yeah.
What they mean is it's giving Narnia vibes.
Like
vibes,
yeah.
like it feels like Narnia.
Yes.
And that's where we're getting this language, it's internet language.
Yeah.
Sorry, I feel like I'm
true. And
the representative of internet culture.
And it's true, because previously you'd have rainbow vibes, relating to.
So when you say vibe shift, there's a general feeling. It's another way of describing what the Overton window heuristic is trying to suggest. Overton window is perhaps being a bit analogous and saying, political consensus can change and shift, and a vibe shift is a bit more amorphous, but it still speaks to something real, which is that you can feel something changing. It's almost like you feel it before you can scientifically measure or observe it.
And arguably, it's also the true sense of a democratic change. I don't mean in the sense of voting. I just mean that what do the people want?
Yes.
What do people actually yearn for, and what do they feel like those desires coming out and going, we actually would want a king-like president, even though we're not we've been told for decades we're not allowed to want that, and we shouldn't. We don't want a great America. Now we actually do. That's kind of what many Americans are realising.
Is this a vibe shift, or has the vibe shift already happened, and we're now just seeing the effects of that? In that this is the result of people changing their kind of, or maybe being more outspoken with the things that they actually believe and calling spades, and we're now actually seeing that in the water. I
mean, nothing happens immediately, does it? It's always going to have tendrils going back however long and however far. So in this instance, with regards to the USA, we've talked about it in a previous episode, how it seems prepared for by, in part, in the short term, Biden's inefficacy. And then in the longer term, just the shift, we talked about this in a previous episode, the shift towards what we would now call woke around 2013-14, and you could even trace that further back, the sort of the idea of there being an end of history, the Fukuyama stuff, the idea of there being an end of history and the liberal order is established and it's settled and it's maintained, and then you start to see in 2010 onwards generations going, hang on a second, I'm not entirely sold on that consensus. So you're gonna see, there are definitely things, as you're saying, Tom, the vibe has shifted for some time. I mean, Brexit was a marker in the sand, obviously in 2016, same year in which Trump was elected. And here in the UK, we are strange for being one of the only countries in the Western world who have a socialist leftist government. A lot of them are turning conservative. Even in like Sweden and elsewhere, they're talking about deportations, and we're basically one of the few, and we're an odd exception. That's in large part thanks to how much the Tories absolutely messed up COVID and other things from 2020 onwards.
They just committed political suicide, constant backstabbing, constant ploys and intrigues and inconsistencies, hypocrisies. It was just awful. And actually, if that figures again with the fact that you were just teaching history.
Yes.
Because it's also about people rediscovering their history. So a lot of this stuff, especially in the Christian realm as well, there's people who are going, oh, okay, I don't have to accept the paradigm that I've been offered by my culture and even by my church culture over the last 100 or so years. Now, we could, without us going into that whole stuff about the post-war consensus, that's one of them, that sense of this is just, you will think like this and you will hate in this proportion and you'll hate this as much as we hate it, and if you don't hate it as much as we hate it, you're going to be in trouble and we'll, dox you or cancel you. And people are going, actually, let's just step back to the 19th century and back, and let's just go, wow, look at all these Christians who love the Lord, and they have completely different political opinions to most of the people I've ever met in a church or in a Christian setting. And there's There's 1900 years worth of them.
Yes.
And they span different cultures in different ways, and they really believed in kings or something. Oh, you're not allowed to believe in kings having significant power anymore. Well, you're not allowed to believe in anti-feminism anymore. That'd be a real problem. I mean, and it just shows again the fact that we're so saturated in this leftist, what was the previous leftist vibe shift, which has been going on for decades and decades. I think recently we saw an article, again, linking back to the Trump, the new Trump dynasty or monarchy.
Is anyone else using that language?
I think we are the first to coin it, so we should get money for that.
Oh, that's
Donald,
like
if you are listening, feel free to use that and send us £1 million in sterling.
God save the king.
God save the king. That's right.
Literally,
we're referring to you, okay? So the true king of the empire, the world empire that will be. But people discover it. You think of Nigel Bigger's book, Colonialism: A Moral Reckoning, last year. That was significant. I'm going to go and see him in a lecture in Oxford in a few weeks. That's a vibe shift. Nigel Bigger a few years ago got cancelled for saying there's things about the colonial era which were not wholly evil. And it's like all of his Oxford colleagues, all of his Oxford colleagues were like, you can't do that. And again, maybe we'll do an episode on colonialism, imperialism sometime. But it's like, you're not allowed to do that. But he's like, well, I'm going to. And he's extremely reasonable. He's not a polemical person at all. He's a moral theologian, very, very well respected. He still has his emeritus status. I think he's All Souls College in Oxford. So he just we have to look at facts. We have to look at the history. We have to look at how everyone else viewed the world before the lenses you've all put on in this postmodern world that makes you, or this feminist world, or this post-colonial world, which makes you think that you should carry around this guilt for the rest of your life and never attempt anything great, never attempt any endeavour again. And people are going, well, let me just read some history. Let me just listen to Nathan talk about history. Let me just, I was as a family, we went to visit Whitby recently.
Brilliant place.
The northeast. I've never been to the northeast coast of England. I know.
It's
I'm so sorry. I know you're from the northeast.
Yeah, it's outrageous. It's literally one of the most beautiful
It's
portions
amazing,
of the
and it's
country.
less horrendously expensive
flat.
than the south
It is a
coast.
bit flat. You like the hills, don't you? You like the hills.
Tom's just like, I'm just going to be the, I'm going to.
But
you're a West Coast man, are you?
Yeah. Okay.
There's something aesthetic, though. The aesthetics of the northeast coast. There's something about that you can find nowhere else.
No, it's impressive. Like I was up there, with work a couple of weeks ago, and it's impressive.
And for me, it's the marriage of the aesthetics of the actual landscape and the history, both religious and cultural history together. Because you've got obviously like the Synod of Whitby, like monumentally important in the history of the church. In the 7th century, Nathan? 600s, isn't it?
Yeah,
so
600s.
where they kind of unifying...
and resolving Celtic Christianity as well.
This
is the other. Sorry to interrupt you, but it's also it's unique culturally because of. And we've talked about this before. We're going to probably say that a few times, but because of the history of Danelaw and the Vikings in the northeast, you have a sort of. Even I know this is going back 1,000+ years, but you have a history and a heritage that is slightly distinct from the other parts of England, the Anglo-Saxon kingdom.
Yeah.
And then religiously, you do have that. I know this is stretching northeast a little bit in terms of definition, but you've got Lindisfarne and you've got the Celtic Christianity, and again a slightly different flavour. Yeah. There is something really unique about the northeast. I'm not saying other places aren't unique for other reasons, but for those reasons, the northeast is quite unique.
Lindisfarne obviously being one of the first places that the Vikings attacked in Britain. And it, like that whole, like I said, being there at Whitby was also, you got that kind of like, even if it was just for that ancient sort of monastic history, that would be interesting anyways. You go the 199 steps up to Whitby Abbey, and then you're looking over at this amazing harbour, natural harbour, and then you look at the kind of what was formerly Great Britain. You're like, places like Whitby were fundamentally important to Britain's empire and the civilizational sort of vision they tried to export to the world. And they were very successful at exporting. And I think we've mentioned before that people in former colonial or Commonwealth nations aren't thinking of us like the Nazis. We think of ourselves as the Nazis. They don't all think that. Some do, but probably because they've been influenced by Western, European, like Parisian thinking, often postmodern people like deconstructive thinking, Foucault, Derrida. And so you look at that, and I read a book called Endeavour about the HMS Endeavour, which is James Cook's I'm going to circumnavigate the globe in a ship in the 18th century, and it was like expressive of this era of great vision, great feats that you look at it and you go, how many people in Britain are like James Cook? There aren't any, and it's not just him on his own. It's like the people who gathered to him. It's the people who chopped the trees down, and it's the quality of the oak and the way they had to transport it, and the way that the British ships were better than anyone else's ships because we had the best oak.
And the willingness to endure pain and discomfort for months on end.
Yeah, this is where the STEM. This is about our engineering friends. It's like vision of like religious vision, cultural vision, like the kind of humanities and the STEM, as it were, coming together. They're like, we all believe in the same thing together. We're going to make amazing ships, and we're going to go around the world and find stuff out, and we're going to explore, we're going to discover, we're going to map the world. Like, what on earth? Like, what a drastically huge vision.
I mean, just bringing that back to kind of the topic that we were thinking about. I'm just thinking drill, baby, drill. And how does that kind of tie in with this to some degree? Like, because I don't know how it came up. I ended up watching this video the other day. I don't know how this happens. And it was just an image of like an American evidently drilling in some sort of field, probably down south somewhere, and just the effort to like swing crane hooks around and like pick up bits of machinery.
I think I've seen this video.
And
is it like a guy just being constant, like, and there's loads of water and there's oil and there's all sorts. Yeah, I've seen that video.
And he's there,
it's
like
a couple of years old, but it's great.
He's just swinging this colossal hook around,
just
like
manly.
connecting it to different things. Like you wouldn't see. It's also interesting that you wouldn't see that in Europe because the legislation wouldn't allow it.
Yeah.
Okay. But also the number of times that you've kind of heard different parts of the US suggesting that they're trying to make the nation, Trump's not trying to do this, but trying to make the nation like Europe, kind of subdued. We're not going to do any of this hard work. We're all going to be a bit effeminate and certainly control.
Service economy.
And you've got you got the fun stuff at the moment. If you're comparing kind of legislation in America versus Europe, we're busy attaching the flipping screw caps to the top of our bottle tops or 2-litre Coke cans, and America's out there landing spaceships on platforms.
It's
totally
kind of
different.
It's unbelievable.
It's a totally different. This is what we're saying about the vibe shift, isn't it? That it feels like something has changed. And specifically in America, you can see that in the response of Europe to Trump this time round. So specifically, I think Keir Starmer had a phone call with him recently, and he's speaking really positively about Trump now, and they're all very eager. He and Lammy and others want him to have a state visit. They're dangling the possibility of him meeting the king and the royal family. I mean, remember, these are the same people who called him Hitler, but a few years ago, again, as on a previous episode, we read out those quotes. The response this time round has not been one of resistance. We are the resistance. Remember, that was such a major thing. It was so stupid now. I think we're going to look back at the media, especially the cultural products of the first Trump period, with such disdain and curiosity. I mean, I remember watching even things like, forgive me guys, I know you wouldn't be interested, well, I watched this CW show with my wife called Supergirl. CW is this network, American network, and they used to have largely like superhero shows, and we watched Supergirl, and Supergirl became the most. We had to stop watching.
I don't forgive you for this, by the way.
That's not a problem, but it was reasonably good for the first season. But then it became insufferably woke, and they had a madam president, and it was all because loads of the cultural forces, Hollywood and elsewhere, saw themselves as part of the quote resistance. So that's why when I'm watching stuff on Netflix, I go, "What year was this made?" So in 2017, 18, 19, 20, 21, you'll guarantee you're going to get a female president, and you're going to get some nasty man who. We just finished watching the first season of Designated Survivor on Netflix, and of course there's a Trump populist character. It's almost pathetic again because they're casting themselves as the resistance. We are part of the cultural resistance. You don't see that now.
And that's
you saw some protesters, I think, at the time of the inauguration, wearing those, what do they call them? Those stupid hats. Pink hats, which I don't think we can repeat here. But largely, it was muted in terms of the opposition. The world leaders are accepting it, partly, I think, because he's won the popular vote as well as the electoral college. But more than that, there's like a sense of, the left is tired, and we don't have the arguments against him anymore. We don't have the will to fight back anymore. Think about 2020 when Biden campaigned the first time. The sheer force of will of the what is it? Yarvin talks about as the cathedral, the institutional powers that be. It was enormous. There was not looking back. It's almost inevitable that he lost. Trump, that is. You don't see anything like that now. And we're seeing the vibe shift happen even here in terms of our response to him. And what was that recently? Reform in certain polls being pulled above Labour and Conservatives.
For the first time, they're the highest ranking one. But it is interesting what you say, the Hollywood show, that's where we're going back to the Mel Gibson thing. It's like Donald Trump's like, I see this problem. When was Hollywood better as a cultural force? This isn't insignificant. Some people might be listening to this and go, why does this matter? It's just entertainment culture. It's massive. It changes people's hearts and minds hugely. The movies that they watch, the stories that they think are good stories, affect who they'll vote for, what doctrine they will prefer.
The reason why we approve of LGBT stuff in this country is because loads of baby boomers watched Coronation Street for years, and there were stories in favour.
All of them have that. EastEnders had that.
Yeah.
When I was growing up as a child, I remember watching EastEnders. This is a British soap. Based in the East End of London, and Coronation Street is based in Manchester, I think, or somewhere in North Lancashire.
Coronation Street, Manchester, EastEnders, East End.
Like that, so they're introducing gay characters who are like slowly brought in as like usually the victims of horrible, vile, homophobic abuse or something. Suddenly they become accepted. Downton Abbey had the same thing.
The infuriating thing is you
like
can't get people to see this.
Yeah.
So when you're trying to say to people, you realise that like maybe 50% of your worldview is being shaped by your uncritical consumption of media. I mean, that sounds awfully patronising. I don't really care because it is from experience. It's true. Like if you're not seeing yourself as in some sort of dialectic between you and the world, which is what the church has by its definition. If you don't have that, you're going to say, well, this is what people think. I don't want to be, even just implicitly, I don't want to be against the consensus. I don't want to be against the majority.
We want to be agreeable.
But I mean, with the media thing, I was chatting with someone the other day who's like a diehard Radio 4 listener. Okay, and there was that poll that went round. Pursuing the idea of another general election. And what, like 6 million people signed up?
It might be 2.
It's not possible.
But it was a lot.
It was more than 2.
Was it more than 2? I might have been.
Okay, I might be exaggerating. But anyway, a significant number. And he hadn't heard of it. So, I mean, like the BBC haven't said that it exists. And just to think that there's therefore out there a lot of people who are consuming mainstream media who aren't aware of some of this stuff that is going on.
Well, like there's a former Labour MP who got done for child sex stuff, like keeping hold of, I think, child CP.
Okay.
Did you? I bet we haven't even heard of that.
I haven't heard of that.
Yeah, it's because it wasn't publicised on.
I mean, it's hard to keep up, isn't it? There's so much. If you decided to do a media fast, then I think it is like not a bad idea for someone to take a whole month. I mean, I'm tempted to take a month off social media at some point. Don't hold me to that.
But I mean, I'm struggling to keep up with things you guys are talking about because I'm not exposed to the media.
And there's advantages
I'm the same
of
with
it.
Twitter. I don't roll X.
I mean, X is, to be honest, Twitter is literally where a large amount of people who are influential people get their news. Like, I say influencers do. So like people who, I know there's maybe many listeners to our show may not be on Twitter, but I reckon most will know what's going on through that if they are on Twitter, because I think that's what Elon Musk is. Maybe he's got a vested interest in doing so, but he is correct in saying that this is replacing the mainstream media. You are the news carriers now. You're the journalists in a way, and now of course that does come with problems because you've got journalistic standards. But because the journalists themselves haven't kept to those supposed objective journalistic standards, why should we believe them anymore? And that's something that I think people are realizing. So that's why, Trump can go, this needs to be fixed. I'm going to call up Mel Gibson. Just kind of think, and John Voight. I'm going to get Rocky. Rocky's going to come and sort this out, and or Hulk Hogan, come and It's
interesting that it's returning to a '90s consensus. Though.
It is, that's true.
It's interesting, generationally and culturally, though, because it's after the after the Cold War, and also before 9/11. There's that sort of. I'm not saying it was all great. There were wars in Eastern Europe and elsewhere. It wasn't all great, but the 90s. He is a 90s man. I think he peaked, as it were, culturally, like we all do at a certain age. And for him, that was 80s, 90s.
We all peaked in the 90s.
Everyone peaked in the 90s. But, it is interesting. He wants to return to what Academic Agent, I've forgotten his real name now, but talks about this, a Fresh Prince. The return to Fresh Prince is what he says. Have you heard this theory before?
Like the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air?
Yeah. So look up Academic Agent. He's really quite interesting. Not a Christian, but he's quite interesting. And his theory is that his phrase, "putting the woke away." That's his analysis of what's going on. Perhaps we might also call it a vibe shift. They're putting the woke away, and so we're going to start to see, especially in the 2020s into the 2030s, more of what we're talking about. The sort of anti-woke stuff take hold, governmentally and culturally. And the idea is that they're going to want a return to Fresh Prince. That is to say, a return to the consensus of the Fresh Prince, which is where no one was really thinking about the racial relations of Will Smith. You could have white people, black people on camera, and actually white people would watch Fresh Prince and go, Isn't it great that that he isn't it awful that he's suffering from this sort of racial insult, and let's watch this and share in this black culture and not see a problem and not see colour. He was totally colourblind. And we're going to want to return to Fresh Prince. Now, what Academic Agent says is that they're preparing, the powers that be are doing that in order to perhaps facilitate, what do you need if you're going to fight conflicts in the future? You need white boys, and you don't want disenfranchised white boys.
Right.
If you're going to fight wars and conflicts against certain other powers. That's a conspiratorial line. But he certainly might be right about the Fresh Prince attitude, though.
But you can see the dangers, especially here in the UK, like you're right to say the UK is an outlier. Mm-hmm. So there's this great... the reason I mentioned James Cook and Whitby earlier, I'm like thinking Elon Musk is like that. He's an entrepreneurial, big vision... imperial type guy. So is Trump. Trump's basically an imperialist. I mean, he's buying Greenland, or maybe just, people say he's just a businessman, so he's coming out ridiculously strong.
Make Canada the 51st state.
Yeah, so that obviously it helps him in the negotiation. I'm going to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America and things like that. That's an imperialistic mindset, and he's just like, we should make... That's what... he's consistent. Make America great again. He's been consistent with that. So people are almost like, I can't believe he's actually doing this. Like, what do you think it means for a nation to be great? Like, they should be confident. We did that. Britain did this. We went all around the world. Loads of places in America are named after British towns and cities. Like the New or county, New Hampshire, as a, things like this.
Most
New York.
And you've got Abraham Lincoln
Memorial Library down there. Yeah.
I was going to ask if you knew anything about that.
Yeah, I do. It's because Watchon, the guy who built the church building, he was British born, but went to America, made his money in oil, and came back as a philanthropist and built. Which is why we've got an Abraham Lincoln Memorial.
You've also got there's some sort of White House.
Yeah, and the buildings around this town. He actually built lots of them around here.
Okay.
There's a biography of him knocking around in church. Not that it would help you guys on the listening to this, but you guys sitting in front of me, you guys go and borrow the book.
We shall.
But no, it's quite interesting. There's a good example of sort of America again giving a British-born man his fortunes.
But I think we should also. You mentioned he's just a businessman. And I think we need to get away from that type of language. And I think that I don't know if that's kind of our default. We are in a socialist society, therefore we've got to kind of shun that idea. But the fact that we don't have any businessmen within, within government, and we're just kind of seeing what is happening.
I just say that I wasn't actually disparaging businessmen. I think.
I think it's just a general term that is often used.
I think you're right actually to pull that up, because in a way it's almost like It assumes a pejorative, doesn't it? It assumes
he's not a cynical class.
He's cynical and only wants to make money or win a. He wrote that book, The Art of the Deal, which I haven't read. I'm sure many people are going to read The Art of the Deal now, which is, I think he wrote it in the 80s as a businessman, and he does approach politics like that. So the way he does his sort of foreign relations, he approaches it as a businessman would, which is like, I want to win, I want to get the best deal, I want to understand what the other person across the other side of the table wants. I want to articulate what they want, and I want to find a way of negotiating that even makes them feel good, even if I'm actually winning, kind of thing.
But I think that even that in and of itself is kind of somewhat a socialist stance on business, because any transaction, whether it be the one that you described there, or you go out and buy a pair of shoes, both parties win.
Greenland or buy a pair of shoes.
Like the Adam Smith thing, isn't it?
It's the Adam Smith thing. Like, both parties actually win. Like, whereas in the UK and kind of, most left-leaning and socialist areas, like, there's this idea that we're talking about kind of closed pie economics. If I win, someone else loses. It's actually garbage. Like, two people win in any one transaction, otherwise it wouldn't happen.
Of course. George Gilder, the same. What's that book he wrote? George Gilder's book. Anyway, watch the Canon Plus documentary if you haven't seen it. Your economics.
There you go.
But he's very clever at that, though. Trump. You're right. He does make people feel like they're winning. You can see he keeps his enemies. So if you make an enemy of Trump, he will not forgive you and he will bring you down. We've seen that even in the last few weeks. But he is also quick to not make enemies too quickly and to bring someone back into the fold. So
David Vance was anti-Trump, wasn't he?
And now he's now he's VP. Think about even his response to Keir Starmer. Here is a socialist prime minister who, to be honest, none of us in this room will have much time for at all. Elon Musk, one of Trump's courtiers, doesn't have much time for it all, and yet Trump gets off the phone with him and says he's a very good man doing a good job. And in that respect, sorry Trump, you're wrong, but I can see what he's doing. It's very clever.
It is. To even just be able to say that, like, I think I'd struggle to say those words.
I think any British person would at this point. But
he does sort of. That is. Isn't that Trump's patter though? Like, that's like. because it isn't true. It's ostensibly not true that he's doing a very good job.
Yeah, he said the same thing of Boris Johnson. He did say,
Donald
he is a
Trump
liberal, but...
Yeah, he can't think that he's doing... He surely can't think he's doing a very good job, but it's he just talks in that way, doesn't he? It's like, it's very good, everything's great. Like, he's very positive.
Yeah.
And that's part of the vibe shift as well. People are like, oh, we can be positive. We can actually think on the optimistic side of things. We can say, actually, this is going to get better.
I think
things
it's
can get
control,
brighter.
though. So Trump will know what Keir Starmer said about him. Trump will know what Lammy said about him. Trump will know all of that. But he also knows that Britain needs America. For good and ill, it needs America. And it's almost like a way of using forgiveness tactically. It's
true.
very businessman-like. And that's not, as you say, Tom, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But we see in him a lot of nous. And this is what a lot of the culture despises, especially here in the UK. What they do not see. They think, oh, he's just an idiot. You remember when, do you guys remember the George Bush days? George Bush Jr. And George W. Bush.
There was a sketch show called 2D
Have I Got Any For You, Spitting Image, and then
2D TV was like, it was a cartoon.
They made him as an idiot.
And it was Tony Blair as the kind of lapdog to George Bush, who was an idiot. And it was like, they're both idiots.
It's one of the lingering British snobberies that Americans are stupid, and also specifically that the president is a bit stupid, unless they agree with leftist European politics, then in which case they're geniuses, or brave souls like Kamala. But if they're conservative, no, they're drooling morons. And actually, we have consistently, and by we I mean as a country, consistently underestimated Trump. Consistently. He is far cleverer than we give him credit for. He knows exactly what he's doing. Like even the TikTok thing, that is such a clever move. I'm not sure if I agree with his move to continue it for 90 days, but it's very, very clever because Gen Z now are going to be more on his side. He's going to be currying favour with the tech industries. He's just making some really clever moves these last few weeks. Very clever.
And they're just decisive. Like, I just think that, again, literally the word executive, to execute an order, to actually make decisions, like, that's what leadership is. And I just think we're so used to political leaders not being decisive. And I know that, of course, the whole point is the reason people principally don't like Trump's approach is not just his character issues or the kind of just chuck stuff out of his mouth that doesn't always sound great, but it's like flippancy really. But it's actually that we're used to them taking these long constitutional decisions which slow everything down. There's filibustering and stuff, and of course the point of those processes is it is to restrain tyranny, is to stop a bad egg coming in, a Hitler coming in, something like that. That's why those things are there. But we've clearly gone ridiculously too far. And then someone like him comes along, and is probably just leading like most leaders would have led before the modern era.
I mean, look, I'm not an American, so I would want an American to respond, who loves their constitution. I understand the American threefold distinction. You've got the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch. And generally, historically, the executive doesn't do these sorts of executive orders, certainly not to this extent, not in this sort of flurry, because properly speaking, it must go through the legislative branch. And that is a more sustained, more consistent, more long-lasting form of change. And that's the concern, which I do understand. But you're right. At the same time, he has seen huge errors over the Biden era with regards to LGBT stuff. But more than that, like, look, I know this won't be popular to everyone, but the January 6th stuff, lots of the January 6ers were not guilty of the stuff that they're being suggested, or at least not to the extent. And they were hounded, often years without trial. It was unconstitutional. It was horrendous. And he's pardoned them. And that was... depending on the individuals, of course, I know there'll be details and there'll be nuances. But in the round, I was like, well, that feels like justice to me. You can't just hold on to someone for ages because they're of a political persuasion that you don't like. The only danger is having executed so many executive orders, when the next lot come in, and they will come in, the wheel of fortune always turns. When the Democrats come in, are they going to just do the same thing all over again?
But I wonder if it's a different approach in that, like, being in business, you just get stuff done. You do. Like, you don't take no for an answer. Like, if that particular way doesn't work, you just come up with something else and you get it done. Whereas I think if you are part of the kind of democratic system, which I'd kind of argue that Trump is not, you're not going to be able to see past, like, this is the process, this is what we do. We have to get these people on side, we have to do that. And so I'm not sure if they would. Like, they might kind of learn, you could do this, but they're not going to approach it in the same manner.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, this is largely a question for our American cousins, isn't it? It's like, what do you guys think of this? Is this what kind of country do you want moving forward? Do you want a king in the White House? Is that what you want? I mean, it is largely what the founding fathers were trying to avoid.
Yeah.
Hence why
tyranny, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't actually a discussion, wasn't there? If I'm not mistaken, between John Adams and George Washington, and there's one of the points of contention in those early years of after the Revolution was, what do you call the president and how many terms must he serve? It was Washington who put in the 2-term limit, but also John Adams wanted to call him, forgive me Americans if I've got this wrong, Your Majesty, and wanted to use those sorts of honorifics, and it was Washington who insisted on Mr. President.
Well, I think we talked about this a bit on the What is a Gentleman episode, several episodes back, where we talk about the loss of nobility, and because of the overthrow of the aristocracy in Britain, of course, as sort of connected in some way to the American Revolution, arguably. But I mean, all the revolutions kind of connect together in the fabric of history. But I think we now have inherited this sort of system where we are not allowed to show sufficient honour. So, for example, there's that story we referenced of number 10 Downing Street, where they don't even have a good coffee maker because they are so worried about being the largesse. They're so worried about being attacked for spending too much public money on this or that. So they can't. So I think Keir Starmer's wife can't buy dresses, and so she has to go to functions where she looks the part. But what, she's going to go and buy dresses from Primark? And people go, oh, isn't that great? Because we're so glad to bring you down. We so don't want elites. You are elites. You have to just get over that. You have, even if you're a socialist, even if you're Labour, you have to...
It's inevitable.
Yeah, it's inevitable. So why don't you actually treat it properly, honour it, the way that even God ordains leadership. Like he ordains authority,
at
ordains
least we had
order.
noblesse obliges, nobility obliges. At least we had that concept.
And we don't want to, we're not saying we want to. Everyone just says, oh, so you therefore want tyranny. It's just such a pessimistic way of looking at it. Yeah, we should have our eyes open. Of course, every human being is sinful. Power has a unique ability to corrupt hearts and minds, absolutely does. But is it the only inevitable outcome of power? Inevitable corruption every single time without fail. I mean, yes, we've seen ridiculous examples of it over history, but we've also seen examples of great decision making made virtuously and well legislated and well advised. And so you don't have, so tyranny can be restrained. Yes, we don't want to give people a complete free rein to go and do whatever they want to. We trust them, they're fine, because they may be trustworthy now, and then you give them more and more power and freedom. And you've seen that over history. That can actually corrupt them. It's true. But at the same time, we've just gone so far the other way. Well, we can't even handle.
It's why I'm especially proud of our constitutional monarchic system, because you have the whole point of a constitutional monarchic system is you have all the trappings of monarchy and aristocracy and nobility, whilst at the same time having parliamentary restraints. It's my opinion, it's a wonderful system that ought to work well. It is suffering presently for various reasons. I mean, one of the weaknesses of that system, of course, is if you have a bad monarch, if you have an idiot, or forgive me, I'm not meaning to speak ill of the king, but I just mean if you do have an idiot as a monarch, well, then you have however many years of strife. But it is a good system for that reason, that you have a combination of aristocracy and constitution. I mean, I don't think any of us in this room are arguing necessarily for absolute monarchy in the style of like the Kingdom of France.
We'll see.
He's thinking.
I'll contemplate it. Give me a good king. No, I know what you mean. But
a good king is like the best.
I guess arguably what we're even saying though is because it's like one of these things that we talked about earlier about the vibe shift in the culture. The things we've inherited as a culture are you're just not allowed to think that an absolute monarch is ever allowed. And I just think, okay, let's just remind ourselves what's the authority over us. If we're Christians, it's the word of God. And you do have monarchs which have a tremendous amount of power. You also have examples of monarchs being absolutely terrible and abusing their power. The history of Israel's kings is literally, yes, you might get a good king every now and then, but vast majority of them, I'd say, are bad kings, except the great ones like David. But even he's a kind of bad plus good. But I think. We just aren't allowed to think certain things.
The point is we should be able to weigh up the balances in the balance of what good and
for
bad.
Example, people go, this is so lit. Everyone was idiotic because they believed in this sense of inherited titles and nobility. Well, and that's crazy because it should always be meritocratic. I get that can be terrible, but equally, those people are brought up to know the honour and duty. And most of them, even the bad ones, they can't really escape it. So I don't think Charles is great, but he's been educated very well in a particular way. He's been educated for that role for his whole life.
He's not like us.
He's
I'm just going to put that out there. He's not like, if he was in this room, we'd be talking about a different class of human being.
Yes.
And I don't mind saying that. I actually think a lot of the
Class,
problems with this... Yeah. Class. Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't mind saying that that there would be... If the system that we're talking about would be put in place and be made more of, there would be people over us. I have no problem with that. I'm not striving. I've not got this politics of envy that so many socialists in our country have that mean that if we're going to have this sort of system, well, I have to be the Lord in the manor. I don't want to be the Lord in the manor. I'm really content being what I am. And that contentment in the Lord's providence marked the system that used to exist. Because we've lost this sense of contentment in the Lord. The poor man is get the king in his castle. I remember being taught that. All things bright and beautiful, obviously, I'm referencing. I remember being taught that in sociology at A-level, like, how ridiculous that you'd be content with the Lord in his castle and the poor man at his gate. There is something relatively beautiful about that, the sense of vocation, that arguably the Reformers gave us, which is that the man at his plough, the man with his spade, is as holy a vocation as the king in his castle. The only question is whether or not, again, it has to be a system in which nobility obliges. If you have a system, and this is the problem with the latter French kings before the revolution in France, they were not aware, they were not content, they were not concerned with the people, not to the extent that they should have been, and they did not see that there needed to be changes. Then there always need to be reforms.
And they needed to be overthrown. Now the French the monarchy needed to be overthrown, arguably for the sake of honour.
Yes.
Whereas I think now we just disparage honour.
Yes.
So if there's a dishonourable king, they're not actually being the kind of king we would want.
But we also don't understand what that kind of looks like. Like you touch on the fact that if we had King Charles in the room, like you'd be engaging with a different class of people, like entirely. Like I went down to a conference sometime last year in Oxford, and the sort of people that I was engaging with were better than me, and I'm perfectly confident saying that, and like I felt like I almost wasn't worthy to be involved in the conversation because the level of the stuff that they were talking about, I can barely understand it. And these guys are evidently able to do things that I cannot. And I cannot dream of doing. And I have no problem with that. I want those guys to make decisions on my behalf.
And you want to celebrate and champion them. And I'm writing a book at the moment on David's mighty men, and you see in amongst them in those descriptions in 2 Samuel and 1 Chronicles, hierarchy, and you see mutual championship of one another's traits. You see Abishai, who is honoured among the 30, but he didn't attain to this kind of closed group of the 3. And you see similar dynamics in Jesus and his disciples. There are hierarchies there.
Hierarchy is an essential part of nature in society.
Absolutely. So we just, as Christians, we kind of, again, it's another reason why we kind of have taught this, partly because there are biblical warrants for challenging abuses of hierarchy. Let's say James is the most obvious example, not showing partiality. You can totally see churches where, in the church, the church at the top of the hill in Whitby, I don't know what it's called.
I don't know what the name of the church is.
I think maybe St Hilda's, probably.
St Hilda's?
Yeah, probably St Hilda's.
Yes, it probably is,
because she was the,
Hilda of Bingen.
Yeah. And we'll get on to Lady Bishops later, maybe.
The abbotess.
The abbotess, that's it. But you go there and you could see an example of the old English churches where the pew system, and it was like, this church is a free pew, this church is reserved for strangers, but there are some pews that you have to rent. Like, so if you want to go there with your family, and you want to make that's your pew, but you have to pay for it. Because they do want to keep some that are free. And I've been to some churches in Nigeria where there are literally set apart parts of the church for dignitaries. That's actually, someone could look at that, go, you guys must agree with that because you talk about hierarchy, honour. It's like, no, actually, interestingly, there's something rightly equalising about the status within the church. There's no slave, no free, no Jew, no Greek, no rich, no poor.
You see in the coronation ritual, King Charles, as he's anointed, stripped himself of all royal regalia, the golden mantle, and strips himself to pure white linen, this sort of simplicity of linen. That's again symbolising
because
the fact
he is
that
a man.
He is like anyone else in that regard, and yet not like other people because he's anointed. And we've said this before, that hierarchy is essential, certainly in our political context. What legitimises political action? What legitimises the fact that Parliament can make laws? What makes them able to do that? The crown in Parliament. Otherwise, where does our right to make laws and to enforce them come from? This is a question I just asked generally. Where does it come from? And how do you know that you have that right? And historically, we've said that there is a man appointed by God in society by the providence of the Lord, either through strength or through heritage. He is a man, namely the king, who is anointed to be his conduit for such law and to enact the Lord's will in the state. And so from him flow all political choices. And where else does it come from? Again, this hierarchy that we still have it, but we've obscured it under so much socialism, shall we say. Socialism really at root is the hatred, the envy of hierarchy, is the desire to bring everyone, flatten everything down. Everyone must be exactly the same.
Yeah, and it's complete. Everyone knows it's nonsense, and yet they're striving for it. We see this in the.
Well, they pretend. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say in the academy you see this especially. We won't go into a massive tangent about this, but just the stuff that Trump is actually removing, the DEI stuff. You just see that as how can we get rid of the inequality? How can we make this person slightly up the food chain?
Crazy.
And there's that kind of wheel of privilege. So us as white Christian Western males, it's like we are we're the lowest in the new food chain according to those DEI metrics. And so it's like, how can we keep pushing them, keep squashing those white men down? And no wonder you're getting this big reaction, because they've been squashed for so long, and they've been told that even though they had no part in it themselves, that they are the great bringers of the inequality. And people like James Cook are not actually heroes, because he, in navigating the globe, he helped enable slavery. He helped enable some of the subjugation of weaker, inferior peoples, as it were, according to some. So it's like, that makes us then think there's no such thing as a superior or inferior culture, and that just isn't true. There are Western culture was superior to most of the cultures around the world, and that is why most of those nations, whether they didn't even understand themselves as nations when they were first counteracted, they weren't conquered. I mean, some were, to be fair. South America is slightly different, maybe, but it wasn't really about. It was about trade. It was about business and commerce, and people going, "Oh my goodness, your technology is insanely superior. Why would we not want to deal with you? We are in deference to you." We look at it and go, how horrible those power dynamics. What do you expect them to do? They had an insane advance in their culture. We did, and it is superior.
I mean, they still use a lot of it.
Exactly. So it's not we don't. Yes, there's always bad actors. There's bad faith people. There's sin. There's a terrible corruption that happens, but it's not inherently bad to say that there's superiority and inferiority in relation to culture, and therefore that's what Trump is sort of trying to recover today. And so that's why he said, we're just not going to have a DEI department. It's just not going to happen. And people are like, you can't do that because why? You told us one day we had to have it. I'm saying we don't have to have it, and I'm the king or the president. So you have to listen.
We started talking about Trump again. Why can we over here on this side of the pond be excited about?
It's a good question.
What's happened?
I mean, I would probably say on that. I don't know what you were saying, Nathan, on it. But I think that it's starting to rub off, but it's going to take a while. And like Nathan said earlier, we are behind the line. We're way behind. Even Europe has a great, move to the right, which all of our media here are terrified about. Oh, look at Hungary. Look at what's happening in Germany. The AfD are rising. Issues in France and stuff, the right rising. Here, we're terrified of a rising in relation to the kind of grooming gangs situation. And that's why they were so desperate to squash any possible reaction by, let's just say, it is generally speaking, white natives. It doesn't have to just be white people. I don't think of Britain as, I was asked on a podcast, why don't you just kick, by a black guy in America, by the way, why don't you just kick all of the immigrants out? It's really straightforwardly, just why don't you just say that's a white man's country? And I was like, well, and this was a black man telling me this. I was like, well, I'm like the squishy liberal in the room going, I don't think we think of it like that. I don't think that's how it works in Britain. You have people who are entirely British, culturally British, assimilated, who it doesn't matter really about the colour of their skin, but it just tends to be the case because the previous leftist vibe shift made it about that. It has meant that white people have in particular been marginalised, and lots of black people see that and go, that's wrong. A very principled, reasonable way of speaking. So I think they're worried about that, and they're so worried about any rising of this again in some of patriotism, Anglo-Saxon culture heritage, that they would even be willing to overlook the scandal of Rotherham and say, well, we just don't want a race war. We just don't want people to be annoyed at Pakistani Muslims. So they're gonna make it about that. So we'll just overlook it again and again and again. And all of these actually racially targeted white girls are being abused. And this is a culture, the same culture, which is so terrified of any kind of abuse or misogyny in any other context that, I don't know, you'll be called a misogynist if you're just a kind of very standard, fluffy, soft complementarian. You're a misogynist. You hate women because you don't want them to be preachers in a church. But we'll totally allow like the rape and grooming of loads of these girls over here because we don't want to. That's a liberal. That's the evil and the poison of that ideology. And if people kind of think, oh, it's not that, it's that sensationalizing. No, it isn't actually. Like, you have to look at it barefaced. What is logically going on, and is it an outworking of the worldview, or is it just a few bad people involved in it? No, it's a working out of the worldview. They have to keep this quiet in order to move it. So to back to Tom's question, it would be, we are still in a massive morass there of not being able to get out of it. But I hope, maybe accidentally, by the ridiculous sycophantism that is British approaches to American power and money, we will inevitably be drawn into that slipstream. And I think it will be a good thing. And many people do so holding their nose. But eventually, maybe they'll, like with Trump, 2016 voters for Trump are different. A lot of people were voting, I guess, I don't like Hillary, so I'll vote for Trump. And people weren't really happy. And now suddenly they're like, I am 100% happy to vote for Trump. And they're happy to talk about it publicly. Here, we still have that other issue. We'll do one quick thing before you jump in, Nathan. We'll get that quote up from our former... a church that we were in 20 years ago, right? An evangelical church in Britain. You've seen this quote, Tom, have you?
No, I don't think I have.
I will reveal this to you then. So
this isn't by the church leader, we should say. This was...
No.
He's reposting.
Well, he said...
a quote.
Well, he said, this articulates my feelings about Trump better than I could. So it was... It's the equivalent of someone writing it. And it was... by some post in 2019 by a group called Occupy Democrats. And I'll just read a bit of it. It's a long, sprawling, rhetorical nonsense post, but it's just unhinged, really. So listen to this. This is like a respectable British church leader who was a policeman, even.
Well, that doesn't say anything.
Yeah, that's true. That's fair enough. Who said like, I tick all of this. This is like, I put my stamp of approval on this. I'm a Christian, and this is what I think. Someone asked, why do some British people not like Donald Trump? Nate Wright, white, an articulate and witty writer from England, wrote this magnificent response. Well, a few things spring to mind. Trump lacks certain qualities which the British traditionally esteem. For instance, he has no class, no charm, no coolness, no credibility, no compassion, no wit, no warmth, no wisdom, no subtlety, no sensitivity, no self-awareness, no humility, no honour and no grace. All qualities, funnily enough, which his predecessor, Mr. Obama, with which Mr. Obama was generously blessed. So for us, the stark contrast does rather throw Trump's limitations into embarrassingly sharp relief. Plus, we like a laugh, and while Trump may be laughable, he has never once said anything wry, witty, or even faintly amusing. Not once.
Is so ridiculous.
Not
There's
ever.
so much of this already that is so like documentarily inaccurate.
There's a picture of Starmer.
But do you remember when he said, when Trump said, it was before this, it was during this election, recent election routine. He said, "You're going to say, I can't do the impression. You're going to, we're going to keep winning. We're going to keep winning. We're going to have so many victories. Are you going to say to me, I can't do it. This is too many victories. I'm going to say, no, we're going to keep winning." That's genuinely objectively funny.
That is, and like mixed into a genuine reality as well. It's like,
I just love the image. They're going to say, stop it. We're winning too much. No,
we will keep winning, and you'll get used to it. Don't worry.
You will like it.
Yeah, I mean, actually, maybe I'll just read the whole thing, and you can just jump in when you want to interrupt me. And this thing, basically, you both just said that's just factually untrue. Then the next sentence is, I don't say that rhetorically. I mean it quite literally. Not once, not ever. And that fact is particularly disturbing to the British sensibility. For us to lack humour is almost inhuman. But with Trump, it's a fact. He doesn't even seem to understand what a joke is. His idea of a joke is a crass comment, an illiterate insult, a casual act of cruelty. Trump is a troll, and like all trolls, he's never funny and he never laughs.
Couldn't
he
you be
only
saying
crows
never laughs?
for jeers.
Couldn't you be saying this about Starmer?
I mean,
is he not aware of his current prime minister?
It's astonishing. I mean, this is just mad. And scarily, he doesn't just talk in crude witness insults. He actually thinks in them. How does he know that? I don't know. But he thinks in these witness insults. His mind is a simple bot-like algorithm of petty prejudices and knee-jerk nastiness. There's never any underlayer of irony, complexity, nuance, or depth. It's all surface. Some Americans might see this as refreshingly upfront. Well, we don't. We see it as having an inner... Thank you for speaking on behalf of the British people there. We don't. We see it as having no inner world, no soul. And in Britain, we traditionally side with David, not Goliath. All our heroes are plucky underdogs, Robin Hood, Dick Whittington, Oliver Twist.
That's why I'm arguing for the establishment, stooge. Trump is Joe Biden.
Trump isn't neither plucky nor an underdog. He's the exact opposite of that. He's not even a spoiled rich boy or a greedy fat cat. He's more a fat white slug.
Fat white slug.
A Jabba the Hutt of privilege. And worse, he's that most unforgivable of all things to the British, a bully.
Weren't we just talking about grace at the beginning?
I know, this is like... that is except when he's among bullies, then he suddenly transforms into a snivelling sidekick instead. There are unspoken rules to this stuff, the Queensberry rules of basic decency, and he breaks them all. He punches downwards, which a gentleman should, would, could never do.
But calling someone a fat slug...
You call him a fat... That's a totally gentlemanly thing. You fat slug.
It's not just surface insult, there is depth to that sort of insult.
And I know what you think.
A lot of nuance to
you
that.
think in evil.
Yeah.
You don't even just say evil. And every blow he aims is below the belt. He particularly likes to kick the vulnerable or voiceless, and he kicks them when they are down. So the fact that a significant minority, perhaps a third of Americans, look at what he does, listen to what he says, and then think, yeah, he seems like my kind of guy, is a matter of some confusion and no little distress to the British people, given that, A, Americans are supposed to be nicer than us, and mostly are. I don't know what that's about. B, you don't need a particularly keen eye for detail to spot a few flaws in the man. The last point is what especially confuses and dismays British people, and many other people too. His faults seem pretty bloody hard to miss. After all, it's impossible to read a single tweet or hear him speak a sentence or two without staring deep into the abyss. He turns being artless into an art form. He is a Picasso of pettiness, a Shakespeare of shit. His faults are fractal.
It's like listening to every chat show on BBC chat show over the last 10 years. You know, the worst thing about this is imagining what whoever wrote this, right? What his face must have been like, and what he was doing after he pressed pause. Yeah, exactly. After he pressed pause and saw the lights coming. That's the worst part about it. Yeah. He probably thought he was so clever.
Yeah. I read a book recently by Gary North called The 5 Pillars of Biblical Success. And like, obviously that title is somewhat provocative in and of itself and doesn't really portray what was in there. Yeah. But one of the statements they made is that the measures for success in the world's eyes, are incorrect. So what does success look like? Well, it looks like being obedient. It looks like pursuing Christ. But what are the markers of success? Okay, because they're separate. Now, the world is actually pursuing the markers of success, so wealth, respect, the rest of it. But they actually come as a byproduct of obedience. So the interesting thing I think about Trump is that you see a lot of these markers of success. Now, he might be pursuing them by wrong motives, absolutely, and he completely... I'm pretty sure he will be. I'm not going to try and read his motives like this guy just has.
This guy knows what he thinks.
Yeah, this guy knows exactly what he thinks, so he can tell me later. Yeah. But where's my train of thought?
Success, 5 pillars.
So Trump is playing by God's rules, and like we are seeing fruit of kind of him doing that and him being in line with kind of the order of the world. But just the flippancy and the speed at which
interrupting us.
Yeah, Big Ben.
That can kind of just be pushed to one side, and we can go, no, he's actually unsuccessful.
Yeah.
Not only is he unsuccessful, but he's actually the devil incarnate.
It's crazy.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. It's absolutely crazy.
It's absolutely absurd. Yeah.
Is there more to it?
There's a dash more. But I think your point's really, just briefly, picking up on your point of like, he's going by God's laws. Many people... Or ways, rules. Many people won't get that. Many Christians won't understand that framework because they won't understand how to think of the Bible beyond a pietistic framework. Maybe we haven't really got time to get into the whole pietistic thing.
Certainly the book of Proverbs in terms of like civil wisdom.
But even in the sense, when I was reading a bit of Institutes of Biblical Law, Rushdoony, I'm not like I'm not going to validate everything he's ever said, but I think that just a short little section I was reading sat in someone's office the other day on property. And many Christians don't understand that God cares about property. And of course, I've heard this, many theonomy circles, this will be a big thing in terms of economics. But like, God really does care about property, and that's why you shouldn't steal. It's in the 10 Commandments. You shouldn't steal. And not only that, but he cares about property because you are his property. Remember that you are not your own. You are bought at a price. you're mine, you belong to me. There's something about that that's significant. So that's why many people will try to be rediscovering that in the theonomic world, to say capitalism is not some kind of like, this is just sort of like someone's chosen to take this particular approach, and how evil it is, because it's not like this seems the New Testaments give everything away and don't really care about your property whatsoever, when in reality it is, as you say, it's linked in, it's kind of embedded into nature. Yes, it can be corrupted. Nature absolutely does, because there are corrupted versions of capitalism, as there are in many systems of thought and approach. But this is more something that's like, it's just basic to, if you care about this, then there's certain things that flow from it logically. And Trump is winning and not getting tired of winning in relation to that. Just to last couple of sentences, and then you can wax lyrical. God knows there have always been stupid people in the world. This is a gentlemanly approach. Stupid people, and plenty of nasty people too. But this guy's nasty. But rarely has stupidity been so nasty, or nastiness so stupid. Channeling his inner Churchill there. He makes Nixon look trustworthy and George W. look smart. In fact, if Frank...
George W. again.
We can't get over it. We all know that George W. is just an idiot. In fact, if Frankenstein decided to make a monster assembled entirely from human flaws, he would make a Trump. And a remorseful Dr. Frankenstein would clutch out big clumpfuls of hair and scream in anguish, "My God, what have I created?" If being a TWAT was a TV show, Trump would be the boxed set. And that's the end of the quote. And just remember how I introduced this. This was posted by an a former evangelical pastor. Current evangelical, no longer pastor, I think. But like a good guy. In our memory, indeed. And suddenly it's like, this is literally what I think about Donald Trump. This puts it better than I could ever put it. And then there are people who we know who were like preachers who are really good people, again, from 20 years ago, who are like, well put. And I'm like, how can you read that and think, well put? It's 2025. You're reading that and going, that is literally what I think. And from a Christian perspective, like, this is what a Christian should think about Donald Trump. How obtuse are you? Like how kind of tone deaf are you to what's actually going on in the world around you? You're completely living in a completely different bubble. And also just basic, if you want to be a pietistic Christian who doesn't like Christian nationalism or doesn't like thinking about these political things too much, you shouldn't even be endorsing that kind of speech.
It's crazy.
There's no objectivity to that at all either.
It's just
it's a responsive kind of gut feel that...
It's ironically actually not very British in that it's excessively long and frankly rather verbally incontinent. And there is, Tom, you asked the question before, what was your question? How did you put it before?
How can we be excited about Trump?
Yeah, what import does he have here? And I think that there's certainly not for the sake of his own personality. That we're not saying that he is a morally righteous man in all respects. I don't think he's what the heck he's been saying. He's a fat slug.
Frankenstein.
He has no grace, no legs, no anything. He doesn't love his pets and he doesn't kiss his wife. Like I don't think that is madness. That is just midwittery at its worst. So I don't think we should be enforcing him, though, on that level anyway. We're not talking about a man who is like that. What so many Christians are not seeing, well, first of all, what that sort of Christian is not seeing. The first response you'd normally see, if there are any dissenting voices on the thread, you would see, well, don't you know that Trump is objecting to abortion, he is objecting to the LGBT madness. These are biblical concerns. These are biblically relevant concerns and interests, which you should be interested into. And that's perfectly legitimate as a statement. What is the alternative here? And the alternative is someone who would have been pro-abortion, pro-LGBT. Yeah. It's a broader thing. What so many Christians are not getting is he represents something, a pushback on a kind of civilizational consensus that was eroding biblical identity and biblical interests. Yeah. So it's not just the abortion stuff. It is a whole civilizational turn, sort of globalist civilizational turn. One that would be wouldn't care for your own where you're from, would atomize you individualistically, would see you as part of a wider egalitarian whole that would erode hierarchies, as we've been talking about, which you need to be a Christian. You can't not have them. You need it in order to make sense of church, and you need it to make sense of society. It erodes that sort of civilizational consensus that Biden, Obama, and the last 30 years really of the West has represented, has been increasingly hostile to the Christian faith. Anything resembling tradition, anything resembling national pride, and Trump represents one of the first major victories against that. And by this church leader and others saying, well, this sounds great, isn't Trump an idiot? They are effectively saying, no, I'm happy with the global order, the consensus that I just described a moment ago. It again, there is...
Give me trash world.
Yes, indeed. There's a level in which you have to say, but hang on a second, regardless of his flaws, what is the alternative? Someone who enforces unrighteousness. And I don't care if Trump... No, let me rephrase that. I do care whether or not Trump is a Christian. I want to see him be saved. I want to see him... I don't want to see him be unrighteous. I don't want to see him be immoral. I do care about those things. But if I am given a choice between an unrighteous person who kills babies and who's happy with babies being killed in the womb en masse and violates the sanctity of a nation and doesn't care about the scriptures, and someone who doesn't do all those things, someone who is not those things, I'm going to choose the person who's not those things. And I'm certainly going to choose them if they're them in and of themselves are like an avatar of the resistance to something that felt inevitable and now for the first time feels, oh, hang on a second, it's not. They can the nation itself and it can be revived. Not necessarily according to Christian principles, but according to cultural principles, which, as we're saying, are more representative of God's ways. So that would be, for me, the reason why Christians should care. He represents something different.
And that whole thing with Obama, there was a reference to Obama in that long quote.
Yes.
And it was kind of like, you'd prefer the person who's witty. Well, I think Trump is pretty witty and charming.
He's very witty. He's very funny.
Charmed. Like he's like a he's not a perfect paragon of a virtuous man, but he's not an evil man in every respect. And I think this is the issue. Like even John Piper referred to Trump's inauguration or Trump's the election of Trump as an evil. So we just can't get beyond. Evangelicals just can't get beyond.
It's a sign of the times thing. It's about whether or not you see Trump as just as an individual, or whether or not you see him as part of a wider whole.
Is it though? Is it not really how the evangelical views the Bible? Are we viewing it as truth and black and white because it is? We're in obviously in church on Sunday, and there was a guest preacher where we were, and my mother-in-law was there. And one of her comments kind of at the end was, it was a bit black and white. And most of the things that you can think of were being called out. If you were a visitor there, you'd probably feel uncomfortable. But like entirely, it is black and white. And that's the issue. So you've kind of got Trump, who is playing kind of by God's laws a little bit, we've said. Because the Bible
breaking, in fairness, breaking lots too. But in business-wise.
Comparatively though, okay. But he's making it black and white. Or you've got kind of the 11th commandment, thou shalt be nice, over on the left-hand side, where you've got Starmer or whoever else. And they're actually doing great evils, but they're doing it whilst being nice. So which approach to the Bible are we going to take? And then how are we going to apply our politics to that?
Would you rather have a charming personality like Obama who makes everyone feel great while he signs executive orders and pardons certain things we shouldn't be, and enacting policies which are going to kill loads of more babies? This is why I bring the John Piper thing up, because John Piper famously stepped out of the pietistic box, and I have a massive respect for John Piper, by the way. I say this as someone who's profoundly influenced by John Piper's piety over many years, but I obviously don't agree with him politically or how he views the history of Christendom. But he did say, I wept for joy at your... he addressed that thing.
Obama,
so he was saying something good in terms of who's challenging Obama on abortion. He was like, no, Mr. President. It was great. It was a great piece, and it was really unlike any of the TGC type authors of the time. But he did say, some of us wept for joy at your ordination. Now, could he say, we wept for joy at Trump's ordination? No, he probably wept for joy at Obama's ordination because he was black, first black president, and therefore this. And John Piper's had this whole historic thing with the race because he was involved in, or I say involved in, he was sort of alive during. I think he was alive during segregation, wasn't he? Yeah, of course, he's adopted a black daughter, but he's also, I think he remembers separate water fountains, as it were, when he was younger, and not speaking against. So he feels the kind of personal guilt of complicity in that black-white history. So therefore, for Obama, that's a really big thing. But that's, again, another example of what you're saying, this big paradigm of we're going to tell you what are the most important things. So I think, to your mother-in-law's point, it's always good to cite mothers-in-law in theological context. There are times where things can be inappropriately black and white. There are authors that I will engage with, Nathan will engage with, you'll have seen, Tom, there are people who see things in a way that you're like, there is such a thing as nuance, wisdom. Proverbs is an interesting book. Wisdom is not always black and white. When Solomon decides...
Answer a fool according to his folly, do not answer a fool according to his folly. Literally right next to each other.
There is nuance. It's just we happen to live in a time where it's actually the lack of prophetic discernment. So it's about going... Someone will hear, whatever that's... I'm sure me and Nathan would have been amening the sermon. It will be calling out certain things that people don't have a frame of reference for that being a black and white issue. Yeah. They don't have the discernment to go, technically, yes, you could. We've been academics long enough to go... There's always a nuanced way to look at the other perspective empathetically and say, what's going on here? Charity should be extended where charity is necessary. In all things charity, but as Augustine says, but actually in the essentials we need unity. And people don't realise that some of those, whether they're calling out LGBT or feminism, whatever, many people go, oh, that's a debatable issue. That's something that we should have charity over. Is that a bigger problem or not? And I think it goes into this issue of things like how much we've allowed feminism into the church. So I was having a conversation with my brother-in-law the other day, talk about in-laws. You need to get an in-law in in the next 5 minutes. Saying, talking about this issue of, let's say, a movement like New Frontiers, charismatic reformed, that Terry Virgo led, fantastic movement. I think historically, Fidesz, brilliant movement, absolutely terrific. It was terrific. It's a great movement. It was a great movement. But going awry, going left on feminism in subtle ways. But many churches don't realise that it's happening because they're just allowing women preachers. They're not allowing women elders. They're never going to allow women bishops, equivalent, or apostles. And it's like I said, it's a bit like Harvey saying, "My house is not on fire." There's a little fire. There's a fire in the kind of cupboard under the stairs.
And we can smell it.
But we can smell it, and there's some smoke, but. Look at the lounge. Look at upstairs. Look at how conservative we are. Look at how we don't deny the divinity of Christ. Oh, wow, fantastic. Let us give you a wonderful congratulations for not capitulating to quite the most obvious, theological heresy. And many of those historic... Look, we don't deny the Trinity. We don't deny penal substitution. We don't even deny male-only eldership. We just allow this little thing here to come in. We just let this fire... I'm sure it will stay here. I'm sure the fire will find its way. It will know how to contain itself.
They don't know what time of day
and it'll be exactly. They have no idea.
I mean, this is the thing. A lot of the opposition, like when the person who posted that, right, it would often be attended by lots of denials of the things where we actually would say are biblical. So if we pushed, he would probably say he probably wouldn't agree, or let's not make it personal, but the people who would post that probably wouldn't agree with how should I frame this? I'm trying to do a double negative. They probably would agree with gay marriage, or they probably wouldn't say that the Bible was infallible. Again, it's attended by lots of the obvious, predictable liberal marks, and yet at the same time, what is it attending? It is attending a paradigmatic blindness. It is like the tribe of Issachar, knowing the times and seasons. Absolutely. They do not. Always, they do not know the times and seasons. They think in terms of the liberal paradigm, and so as such, they have all these other little marks of a liberal attending to it. But that is ultimately the reason why they are opposing Trump. It's because they cannot and they do not understand why anyone would ever vote for him.
But it's also
therein lies their fault.
It's an unhinged sympathy or an unhinged empathy. Like, I was chatting with someone, another Christian, and they were thinking through kind of like how do we serve our community? And one of the things that they highlighted that they could serve is like, what about people who have just had an abortion? Like, they're probably like really upset, and I'm just like, that is nuts. Like, if you think anything to do with justice, like, do you know what they've just done? And like, just that unhinged empathy has done that.
It'd almost be like we won't open more kinds of worms, but you think of the way the same-sex attraction thing. We will do an episode on that kind of thing with evangelical failures on that, because there's a recent document that came out from the Evangelical Alliance, which I'd love us to talk about and do go some critical commentary on, but we haven't got time. But it's a bit going into the desire thing briefly. It's a bit like that untethered empathy, and that's what Bishop Budd, that the lady bishop,
bishop in quote marks,
absolutely, gave to Trump, and many evangelicals here going, stand up, speaking truth to power, and really what she's doing is, to use Joe Rigney's term, it's a kind of weaponized empathy. It's trying to say, those who aren't awake can go and look it up, Bishop Budde, and the comments being things like, the LGBT community or some of these immigrants, they're not all terrible, evil people, and they're really scared and terrifying, so please could you show mercy upon them. What she means is not mercy like don't act like the Gestapo, dragging people out of their houses, because that's what the crazy, deranged liberal
they think he's a Nazi
paradigm think of him as. It's actually more like it's like, I want to influence the policy. I don't want you to deport these illegal immigrants. I don't want you to restrict the LGBT. I guess liberal agenda in culture. Yeah. So that's what she's trying to influence policy. And so people would say, isn't that what you guys are anyone who cares about Christians' influence in political sphere? Isn't that what you should be caring about? Isn't that great? Didn't she do a great job? And you're like, no, that's like an inappropriate overstep, I would say. But by all means, though, we mustn't say the act of what she's trying to do. I almost loathe to say. Talking about her like she's not even in a valid position biblically, theologically. She's like literally she's invalid in standing in that pulpit saying what she said. But historically, obviously, the church has managed to do that. Historically, speaking to the truth to the emperor, Basil, for example, speaking against some of the ways that greed, etc. Of course, denying communion. So this is the thing that happens. We do want the church to do that, but it's like how you do that and on what kind of basis.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to have to go in a second, by the way,
yes,
chaps. But what I will say is, I mean, almost every single English Christian that I know has posted on Facebook has posted that clip positively.
Yeah.
So almost every single Christian that I know from churches in the past, not here, thank goodness, not at all, but has reposted that clip in a positive light, saying how amazing, how awesome. Now, what is going on there? I think, as you said, Aaron, there is a precedent in history, and I think we have a latent sense of it, that Christian ministers should stand against powers when and as necessary, and that can sometimes be brave. And I can concede to the extent that bravery can be foolish and wrong, but there can be a kind of a virtue of bravery in the fact that she stood up and said that in front of him. I don't think we have to be churlish. We can say there was a certain amount of bravery in doing it, and yet at the same time, she was utterly mistaken. Like, one of the things she was literally explicitly said, there are loads of undocumented immigrants who are working in the fields and they don't commit crimes, they just love their family. She's literally defending illegal immigration. She's defending crime.
Well, she's also admitting that there's crime.
They're all here. Yeah, exactly. Well, there in America. She also, of course, mentioned gay and lesbian and trans kids, so obviously implicitly affirming that too.
No, that's a good
even though
thing,
that is explicitly anti-biblical. And one of the most absurd examples of this, right? Someone from Chester we would know mutually posted this. He is a practicing homosexual and a minister, a Church of England minister, right? And he posted a clip. He posted the clip and he commented on the clip in exchange with another friend from Chester, and then separately from that, because I have him on my friends list, posted the Bible verses from Leviticus 19 about embracing the stranger. Yeah. And of course, it's 12 verses separated from another part of the law.
There's something else in
Leviticus 19 that I think might be a bit relevant. Now, what am I saying? I'm saying that all of these categories, these moral categories that are informing the UK Christians' slathering, affirmation of that woman's message, are actually should rightly be informed by what the Bible defines as justice and by what the Bible defines as mercy. It isn't the liberal, as you said, the ninth commandment, thou shalt be nice sort of mindset. Justice, properly speaking, is saying, here is the law of God, and he has laid down precepts of righteousness. And as much as, yes, you're right, we shouldn't go and beat up immigrants, and we should be welcoming within reason to the foreigner. I know it's stupid, as if we have to even say it. And yet at the same time, it is intimately connected, even in the same chapter, to moral sexual ethics.
That's totally of its time, Nathan.
Totally of its time.
Context.
But I love that stuff about the social.
Context.
Yeah, it's absurd. But this is the absolute state of UK evangelicalism at the moment. This is what I wanted to say with regard to this bishop's statement. The absolute state of UK evangelicalism.
What's the queen that John Knox calls out in the immeasurable...
Well, Elizabeth. Well, he wrote it during the time of Mary, and then Elizabeth took the throne and wasn't happy with it. But
that was some standing up.
That was some standing up. Again, I mean, this is why I'm saying it's got nothing to do with it being a woman. I can recognise in church history very foolish moments when people stood up and were brave, but probably shouldn't have done it. And it's in this instance, as you said, her position was just not.
You could also say, by the way, it's sort of brave to something because JD Vance and Trump and everyone's there, but she's also saying something that still
everyone would agree with.
The cultural
You're right.
the cultural tidal wave still on her side.
I don't think it's anywhere near as brave as someone standing up in front of a liberal politician like Biden and doing the same thing. That would be bravery in a totally different category.
Absolutely.
I'm just saying there are measures. There can be gradations of bravery, and there can be kinds of bravery, some of which are well-founded, some of which are good.
And that's why, to kind of almost sum up that we're going to the vibe shift, it's not, and to Tom's question even, it's like this is a work in progress. There are victories afoot. Yes, of course we want to be cautious and not think that the kingdom is coming in and through Trump directly. But we also, it's okay to be optimistic. It's okay to say, actually, I can rejoice in these things. You can rejoice in things and be grateful to God for some of these policy changes. Again, just Christians we've just too often in our pietistic kind of heritage have sort of just gone, it's like, that's just another thing that's happening. Whatever's going on outside this room doesn't really matter, because it's really just us here. Yeah, we've got our little fire under the stairs that we're keeping warm for the feminists. But actually, it's like, we're just going to carry on focusing on this, and whatever happens out there is totally irrelevant. God's sovereign, and he'll just do some stuff. But he doesn't want us to have any agency in what happens in the world. He doesn't want us to extend his kingdom. He doesn't want us to advance the kingdom and disciple the nations, teaching them to obey everything he's commanded. He doesn't want to sort of bring light into darkness. He doesn't really want us to do that. He doesn't want us to be a city on a hill where people actually are drawn to the light because it's so good. He doesn't want us to do that. He just wants us to sort of focus in on ourselves, get some converts as much as we possibly can, and keep building up our own little mini substructure
and we're not
there.
Because we don't think culturally like that.
Yeah.
We don't think culturally like that about the church. We don't think culturally about culture. We cannot. Say the pastor who posted that extract, that absurd screed. There was no way, indeed as a pastor, that he understands why someone would have voted for Trump.
Exactly.
I mean, I just don't understand it. I can understand why someone voted for Keir Starmer. I can. I can understand it. I don't agree at all, but I can understand, especially given the absolute state of the previous
I mean, there's your extension of charity and grace.
Exactly. Yes, I can understand it. I can put myself in their shoes and even empathise with some of their priors, their presuppositions. There is no way he could, even if that's what he's affirming, that screed. There's no way he could sit down with a Trump supporter and say, "I understand you. I understand why you are worried about this world, the trends that you're seeing, and I understand why you would want to see another order, another paradigm. I understand why you want to see a vibe shift, a paradigm shift. That is the biggest problem. The church doesn't. The evangelical church, especially here in the UK, not only do we look askance at our American cousins in a way that I just think is utterly snobbish, but also we do not understand the time in which we're living.
Absolutely. So, and that's a great way to conclude, really, to say that to challenge people, we need to rethink.
I wish I could have dragged out some MAGA hats from underneath the table. That'd be perfect right now.
Worn it for the thumbnails.
That's it. You could do like they used to do for the Reformed Thug Life videos on YouTube. Are you aware of these?
No.
Whenever they say something like Reformed based, kind of just something a bit.
Probably wasn't sunglasses pieces.
Yeah, the black sunglasses come out and some rap music comes on. So if you can arrange that would be fun.
I'll do my best.
With MAGA hats coming on. But anyway, it's rethinking the paradigms that you think are unquestionable. That is what we need, and we're going to keep returning to that theme in different ways. There are lots of things that people need to rethink and go, actually, this isn't as just cast in iron as just because I was formed in this, just because these are the stories I grew up watching, just because these are the songs I grew up listening to, and I therefore am formed by that. Let's be reformational and go, what are the sources? Let's go back to the sources. Where do these things come from? What's the fruit of them? And what does the Word of God actually say? How does the Word of God inform our approach to these issues, rather than our agreeability or our wanting to go with the tide, with the zeitgeist, with the vibe? And yes, you could go with the vibe in an inappropriately rightish way as well. I'm sure that's possible. There will be people who go that and go, oh, let's just change what I think because that's now cool again. Now being with conservatives cool. You don't want Christless conservatism. You just want biblical conservatism. You want to be conserving the pattern, follow the pattern of sound words that you've heard from me, says Paul to Timothy. That's what we need to keep doing. Absolutely. And to preserve that means to apply it in our age as well, to our socio-political sphere too. So I know Nathan's, well, we all kind of need to go. So anyway, so be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Defy the devil and act like men. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Christ is Lord. God save the King. And perhaps even the president. This has been That Good Fight. I've been Aaron Edwards. That's been Tom Chaldecott. That's been Nathan Paler. And we'll hopefully see you next time.
See you later.
Farewell.